Welcome to today's Deep Dive Learner. We're so glad you're here with us. Today our mission is to basically completely dismantle how you think about that loose change rattling around in your car's cup holder.
Yeah, it really challenges the whole idea that currency is just this sterile means to an end.
Exactly. We have a single source document today, which is the Wikipedia article on the Australian $2 coin.
Yeah.
And we're going to use it to prove that this tiny, seemingly mundane piece of metal is actually a masterclass in heavy industrial logistics, behavioral economics, and some deeply moving cultural storytelling.
Right, because when you actually stop and read the specific object, it acts less like a financial token and, well, more like a highly condensed cultural timeline.
I promise you, by the end of this conversation, you will never look at a handful of change the same way again. We are talking about an everyday item that somehow bridges the British monarchy, incredible Aboriginal resilience, and completely unironically brightly colored children's television characters.
It's a pretty wild mix.
It really is. Okay, let's unpack this. Before we get into the historical gravity stamped onto the coin, we need to understand its physical blueprint.
Yeah.
Like, why does this unusually dense, heavy little disc even exist in the first place?
Well, the existence of this coin is rooted entirely in a pretty harsh economic reality, which is the cost-to-mint ratio.
Right.
The $2 coin was officially born on June 20th, 1988, but the Australian government had actually been engineering its release since the mid-1970s.
Wait, really? The mid-70s?
Yeah, they spent over a decade just plotting the demise of the old $2 paper note.
Over 10 years just to swap paper for metal? I mean, that seems like an enormous administrative headache for a $2 denomination.
It was a massive undertaking, yeah, but it was driven by this concept of circulatory life. We all know paper tears and degrades, right?
Yeah.
But the sheer financial burden of printing low-denomination notes is just staggering. A heavily used $2 note might only survive in the economy for, say, 6 months before the central bank has to collect it, destroy it, and then pay to print a replacement.
Wow. 6 months.
Yeah, so over a 30-year timeline, you're paying to replace that exact same $2 value like 60 times. But a metal coin is minted once and can circulate for decades with almost zero maintenance. So it was just a pure cost-saving necessity.
That makes perfect economic sense, but the physical specifications they ultimately landed on are just wild to me. It's essentially like a physical zip file.
That's a great way to put it.
It packs this relatively high economic value into a remarkably small, surprisingly heavy frame. The dimensions listed in the source are incredibly specific. So it weighs exactly 6.60 grams. It's a chunky 2.80 millimeters thick, but its diameter is only 20.50 millimeters.
Right, which gives it an incredibly dense weight-to-size ratio. And they used a really specific alloy for it. 92% copper, 6% aluminum, and 2% nickel.
Okay, so that's what gives it that durable golden color.
Exactly. But that diameter you mentioned, the 20.50 millimeters, that's the true quirk of its engineering.
Because it means the $2 coin is physically smaller than the Australian $1 coin. So I kind of have to push back on this design choice here. If the government spent a decade engineering this, why intentionally make the $2 coin smaller than the $1 coin? Doesn't that invite massive confusion, especially for tourists visiting the country who naturally assume bigger coins equal more money?
Oh, it completely invites confusion, and it was a major concern at the time. But, well, the mint was trapped by the existing physical ecosystem of Australian currency.
What do you mean?
Well, by the time 1988 rolled around, the $1 coin had already been introduced in 1984. And the silver coins, the large 50 cent, the 20 cent, the 10 cent, the 5 cent, they were already thoroughly entrenched in every vending machine, parking meter, and payphone in the entire country.
Ah, so they couldn't just make it bigger than the $1 coin because it would either rival that massive 50-cent piece or require retrofitting millions of coin mechanisms.
Precisely. They had to thread a very tight mechanical needle. The vending machine industry dictates coin sizes just as much as the government does.
That makes sense.
So the $2 coin had to be heavy enough to register its value, but small enough to not be confused with the silver coins. To compensate for the really small diameter, they made it exceptionally thick. Furthermore, they had to ensure it was tactilely unique for the visually impaired.
Which brings us to the edges. The Wikipedia article details this beautifully. It doesn't just have a rough edge, right? It has this interrupted milled edge.
Yeah, the milling is fascinating.
There are exactly 20 notches, but they're mathematically grouped into 4 lots of 5 grooves, and each of those lots is separated by exactly 7 millimeters of perfectly smooth edge.
It's pure tactile engineering. You can feel exactly what denomination you are holding without ever pulling it out of your pocket. And through this bizarre twist of, like, global numismatic synchronicity, those exact dimensions, the 20.5 millimeter diameter and the specific interrupted milling meal, the Australian $2 coin shares the exact same physical profile as the 10 Swedish kroner coin.
Oh, wow. I love that. Two entirely different economies, thousands of miles apart, arriving at the exact same physical zip file.
Yeah, it's a really funny coincidence.
Okay, so we've established this dense, golden, mathematically precise canvas. Let's look at the artwork actually stamped onto this highly durable surface. Because there are two sides to this coin, and they present an astonishing, almost jarring contrast between two very different historical worlds.
They absolutely do. Let's start with the obverse, commonly known as the head side. By tradition, this side is reserved for the reigning monarch. So for the vast majority of this coin's circulatory life, from 1988 all the way to 2023, that meant Queen Elizabeth II.
But even that portrait wasn't static, was it? It functioned almost like a slow-moving clock of her reign.
Yeah, it evolved in distinct eras. So from 1988 to 1998, the Mint used a portrait sculpted by Raphael Maklouf. Then they shifted to a more mature depiction by Ian Rank Broadley.
Right.
Later, in 2019, they introduced an effigy by artist Jody Clark. It's basically a chronological rotation of artistic interpretation capturing the passage of time. And of course, the clock keeps ticking. Following her death, 2024 saw the debut of King Charles III on the obverse, designed by Dan Thorne.
So on one side of this tiny piece of metal, you have the ultimate unyielding symbol of British institutional power, a literal crown. But then you flip it over to the reverse side, the tails side, which was originally designed by Horst Hahn, and you are confronted with something altogether different.
You really are.
Yeah.
The reverse side features what was initially intended to be an archetype of an Aboriginal elder. However, the specific visual inspiration for this design carries profound historical weight. The image is actually based on a drawing by an artist named Ainsley Roberts. And the subject of that drawing was a man named Goya Chungarai.
Who was historically known by the moniker One Pound Jimmy.
Right. Yes, and while he was known by that name in popular culture at the time, the true gravity of his story comes from the fact that Chungarai was a Warlpiri and Matera man from the Northern Territory. Crucially, the Wikipedia article notes that he was one of the few survivors of the 1928 Coniston Massacre.
Which was one of the last recognized massacres of Aboriginal people perpetrated by British authorities in Central Australia.
Exactly. What's fascinating here is the stark objective duality resting right in the palm of your hand. On one side of this single coin, you have the reigning monarch of the British Empire. On the literal other side, permanently bound to the same piece of metal, you have a man who survived a massacre perpetrated by the forces of that very same empire.
That is just an extraordinary historical tension.
It really is, and the design surrounds him with the Southern Cross constellation and native glass trees, anchoring his image entirely to the Australian landscape.
It is, incredibly heavy when you actually stop to think about it. And it makes me want to ask you and our learner listening, how does a deeply tragic historical event like the Coniston Massacre become memorialized on the most common item of daily commerce? Like when this coin is carelessly exchanged for a pack of gum or left as a tip on a cafe table, does that constant mundane transaction trivialize his story? Or does stamping his face into a metal designed to outlast us all somehow immortalize it?
It raises an important question about the function of public memorials, doesn't it?
Yeah.
There is certainly an argument that placing profound historical trauma onto pocket change risks diminishing its gravity through sheer repetition.
Yeah.
But the alternative perspective is that it guarantees unprecedented visibility. It ensures that Goya Chungarai's face and the broader history of Aboriginal resilience is interacted with by millions of people every single day. It weaves that history into the literal fabric of the nation's economy.
That's a really powerful way to look at it.
Interestingly, the source notes that the designer, Horst Hahn, had his initials included on the coins minted in 1988 and 1989, but from 1990 onwards, those initials were removed.
Oh, so the artwork ceased to be an artist's personal creation and just became a permanent cultural symbol.
Exactly. It stands entirely on its own as a national emblem now.
Wow. So for decades, that incredibly solemn duality was the only version of the $2 coin spinning through the economy. But then we hit this massive turning point. The Royal Australian Mint seemingly realizes that this highly durable piece of metal doesn't just have to be a static monument. It can be a dynamic, evolving canvas. And we enter what I like to call the era of color.
Oh, this is a true watershed moment in 2012. The Mint released a special $2 coin to commemorate Remembrance Day. The standard design featured a poppy flower with the words, "Lest we forget," but they took this unprecedented step.
What did they do?
They released a limited run of 500,000 coins where the center poppy was physically painted red with a black core. This was Australia's very first colored circulating coin.
I have to pause here because the engineering required to pull that off is just staggering. We just talked about how these coins live in pockets with keys, they get dropped on concrete, they go through washing machines. The Mint had to figure out how to apply pigment to a mass-circulating piece of metal so that the color actually survives the violence of daily commerce.
And they proved it could be done. The red poppy survived circulation. And once they successfully demonstrated that durability, the floodgates of design completely opened.
It's like they realized they could turn the national currency into, highly durable circulating trading cards.
Yeah.
The evolution is rapid. Just a year later, in 2013, they release a coin with a purple circle for the 60th anniversary of the Queen's coronation.
Thematically, they stayed in that solemn commemorative space for a few years. In 2014 and 2015, for the centenary of ANC and to honor the poem In Flanders Fields, we see intricate colored designs. Green doves, red stripes. They even managed to print a sunset orange sky onto the metal.
But then they take a hard left turn away from military anniversaries, and this is where it gets incredibly fun. They realize the power of distribution. They start partnering directly with Woolworth supermarkets to release the coins.
Yeah, it becomes super mainstream.
Right. In 2016, they drop a series for the Rio Olympics and Paralympics featuring the bright Olympic ring colors. In 2017, they do a whole series based on the beloved children's book, Possum Magic.
And the color palettes become wildly complex at this point. We're seeing vibrant pinks, purples, blues, and navy circulating out in the wild.
Here's where it really peaks for me.
Okay.
In 2019, they literally put Mr. Squiggle, a character, with a pencil for a nose from a classic children's TV show, onto the legal tender of a sovereign nation.
It's brilliant.
We're talking about turquoise, yellow, and bright pink coins being handed back to you as change when you buy groceries. And more recently, they've done cherry blossoms for the 2020 Tokyo Olympics, bright orange for firefighters, and a deeply striking black, red, and yellow design for the Aboriginal flag in 2021.
If we look at the behavioral economics of this shift, it is remarkable. Introducing vibrant color, combined with those limited-run distribution deals through supermarket tills, it completely rewired the public's relationship with the coin.
How so?
Well, it took people who were entirely passive spenders and turned them into active, obsessive collectors practically overnight.
Oh, people started hoarding their change?
They did. The velocity of money actually slowed down in this specific denomination because people refused to spend the colorful ones. The currency became a nationwide treasure hunt.
Which perfectly sets up the sheer logistical nightmare of how these coins actually get into our pockets. Because these colorful, collectible discs don't just magically manifest in cash registers. There is a massive industrial machine dictating supply. And the Wikipedia data on the minting figures reveals some completely fascinating, quirky economics.
Yeah, everything traces back to the Royal Australian Mint in Canberra. That is the sole facility where every one of these coins has ever been struck. The logistical scale of replacing the paper note back in 1988 is hard to overstate.
Right.
To ensure a smooth transition and prevent a currency shortage, they had to absolutely flood the market. They minted a staggering 160.9 million $2 coins in that first year alone.
160.9 million. Just try to visualize that mountain of heavy metal, just injecting thousands of tons of copper and aluminum into the economy simultaneously. And that massive initial drop created a fascinating long-term ripple effect.
It really did.
Because they over-indexed so heavily in 1988, by the time 1991 rolled around, the market was completely saturated. There were just too many coins. So how many standard $2 coins did the Mint produce for general circulation in 1991? Exactly zero.
Not a single one.
Wow.
And that anomaly isn't just ancient history either. It repeated itself very recently. In 2023, there were again 0 standard $2 coins minted for circulation.
That's crazy.
To give you a baseline for how dramatic that drop is, the source notes that the average mintage from 1989 to 2008 usually sat around 22 million per year. So going from 22 million to absolute zero illustrates just how meticulously the Mint has to monitor the physical wear and tear or the hoarding behaviors of the public just to balance the supply.
It is a logistical high-wire act.
Huh.
But, speaking of the rules of the game, there is one legal rule in the Wikipedia article that we have to discuss, because it sounds completely made up.
The legal tender limit.
Yes, there is a strict legal tender limit on the $2 coin. By law, you cannot pay a debt using $2 coins if the total amount exceeds 10 times the face value of the coin, meaning the maximum amount you can legally force someone to accept in $2 coins in a single transaction is $20.
10 coins, that is the hard legal ceiling.
Okay, I am pushing back on this aggressively. Money is money. If I owe my mechanic $50 and I hand him a stack of 25 legally minted, government-approved $2 coins, why on earth is it baked into the legislation of the country that he can refuse my payment? Is the government literally just trying to save us from having our pockets ripped open by the sheer weight of these dense little discs?
I know, it sounds totally absurd on its face. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, legal tender laws are not just about defining what has value. They are fundamentally designed to prevent economic friction. The law exists to prevent people from weaponizing heavy coinage.
Weaponizing coinage.
Yes. Imagine a scenario where a disgruntled citizen decides to pay off a $10,000 municipal tax debt entirely in $2 coins just to spite the local government.
Oh my gosh.
That transaction would require wheelbarrows. It would require multiple bank tellers' hours of manual labor just to count and verify the payment. It grinds the efficiency of everyday trade to an absolute halt.
Okay, when you put it that way.
Right. So, the $20 limit ensures that while the coin holds valid economic value, it cannot be used as an administrative weapon to harass a creditor. Legal tender simply means a creditor is legally obligated to accept it to clear a debt. This law protects the creditor from being buried in copper.
That is brilliant. The fact that weaponizing heavy coinage is a legitimate economic threat that requires parliamentary legislation just adds to the mythos of this little coin. So let's step back and look at the incredible journey we've just taken, learner. We started with a dry economic need to replace a fragile, easily destroyed paper note because it was costing the government too much money.
Yeah.
And that utilitarian requirement resulted in the engineering of a physically tiny, surprisingly dense golden disc with mathematically milled edges designed to trick vending machines.
And that purely functional piece of metal accidentally evolved into one of the most dynamic cultural canvases in the country. I mean, it holds the solemn, permanent historical tension of the British monarchy, resting back to back with Goya Chungarai, a survivor of devastating colonial violence.
It then pioneered color printing technology that survived washing machines, turning everyday grocery shoppers into avid numismatic hoarders. It celebrated everything from the solemnity of war veterans to the sheer joy of Possum Magic and Mr. Squiggle. And crucially, we learned that you are legally barred from using a wheelbarrow full of them to pay off your mortgage.
It is an almost unbelievable amount of history, physics, and utility packed into 6.6 grams of metal.
It really is. So the next time you reach into your pocket or you look at that loose change resting in your car's cup holder, remember what you are actually looking at. You aren't just holding transactional currency, you're holding a highly engineered, deeply storied piece of an entire nation's identity. But learner, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over today. We established early on that the $2 coin was born entirely because it had a longer physical circulatory life than a paper note. Its physical permanence was its entire reason for being. But as we accelerate closer and closer toward a fully cashless society, a world where we just tap our phones and the physical longevity of currency no longer matters, what happens to this incredible storytelling medium?
That's a great question.
When the coins eventually stop circulating, does this portable, tactile history, the colored poppies, the tributes to Aboriginal resilience, the faces we carry in our pockets, does it just vanish into vaults? Or will we find a new, equally pervasive way to hold on to our history?
Something to think about.
Definitely. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking questions, keep looking closely at the everyday objects hiding in plain sight around you, and we'll see you next time.